This is Hidden Killers Week in Review.
A look back at the most prolific stories of the week.
This is Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski.
We're going to be looking into one of the most overlooked and emotionally complicated layers of the Brian Kohberger case, his family. And this is not a piece to expose his family or tout blame on his family. I don't think they have anything to do with this whatsoever. I think they are very much victims in this as well. The people who just days before the world knew his name, they were sharing holiday meals with him. The same people who may now be walking into a courtroom, not just to sit behind him in support, but to testify against him. Not out of malice, but because they might have seen and heard things no one else did. Now imagine being a parent or sibling in that position. 1 minute you're watching Wheel of Fortune with your kid, the next you're on a subpoena list. That's not exactly the Christmas vibe anyone's going for. Joining us is someone who knows exactly what it means to analyze behavior when emotions are running high. Retired FBI Special Agent and Chief of the Counterintelligence Behavioral Analysis Program, Robin Dreeke. Robin, when you hear that prosecutors may be calling Kohberger's own father or sister to testify, what immediately jumps out to you as a behavioral expert? And how does a situation like this, where familial loyalty crashes into legal obligation, tend to play out inside a house room, or more or less a courtroom?
Sensitive, soft touch, which is always going to be key and critical, because here's a father and siblings and family members that, you know, it's hard to get over. This is your son, this is your brother, this is your baby boy. I mean, I always use that term thinking of my own kids. Yeah. I think, you know, the best way, so here, if I was doing this, and I think what they're going to do here as well, is they're not going to ask an opinion of him. They're not going to go down that road of subjective observation. I think they're going to most likely stick with observations of life arcs, behaviors. Mm-hmm. You know, tell me about what it was like with Brian growing up. What kind of things was he into? What was Brian's daily routine for this period of time, through this period of time, during this period of time? Did you see a deviation in that period of time when he came home on vacations? You know, when he first was a freshman in college, what was his routine like when he would come home for a holiday? So they're going to establish a baseline, at least what I would think of his life arc for visits, for college, for school, for the way he lived life. And then they're going to then focus in on a period of time during the murders. What was the behavior like then? What did you observe? What did he do? What they're most likely going to do is they're going to try to highlight a spike in behavior in that period of time, and not ask their conjecture on what they thought happened, because again, that would be too traumatic. I think they're going to then lay out their own thing for the jury to make their own decision. So I would use family members for establishing baselines of behavior, and then highlighting deviations from those baselines is what I would do to try to take the emotional part out. And also because they don't want to be seen as villains in this either by anyone who's sympathetic to a son or a daughter, because that's exactly what defense is going to do, is try to paint him as a victim of the prosecution, a victim of society, and all these things.
Yeah. Yeah. The fact that we have some history that we know about, one of the sisters, allegedly back, before all this went down, he stole her cell phone. And this was apparently back when he was into heroin, needing money for drugs, allegedly. That's how the story goes. And his family turned him in. And I found that to be really interesting. That doesn't seem like it would be the first strike. If you stole your sister's phone, let's turn you into the police. I would think, initially a lot of families would be like, whoa, we can't be doing this. I'm going to guess that was probably not the first strike that something like this occurred, where you're going to go that far with your own son and a sister, having a scuffle of, I stole your phone, that sort of thing. Granted, they were, adults or nearly adults at the time. What are your thoughts?
So, no, I read Howard Bloom's book on the Kohberger case, on Kohberger, the family, from the great interviews he did. And when they turned him in, the sense I get, and again, when you look at the amount of involvement, when you see a dad driving with his son cross country for Christmas break or Thanksgiving break when he's driving back with him, my sense I get is that these things, and even turn them in for the drugs back then, it wasn't an act of malice or an act of resentment towards Brian. It was an act of love and compassion to try to save him.
Yeah.
Here, let's help him to his bottom faster so he can actually have an aha moment, hopefully, and start his own recovery. And so I think that that's what this family that has reps in is going above and beyond at wit's end of trying to figure out ways to help their son. And so I think that was an act of compassion. And so I think turning him in for drug addiction or drug use is going to be a lot different than saying, yes, I agree he committed this murder.
Sure.
Because it's a whole different. I think it's a different mindset that was at play there.
The fact that over the holiday break, when he went back to Pennsylvania for Thanksgiving and Christmas break, and everybody is looking for this white Elantra at the time. The public did not know the name Brian Kohberger. People are just, what's going on here? His sister at home allegedly then was vocal enough to say, he has a white Elantra. However, she described his behavior, or the family kind of knows his behavior, as being kind of out there, kind of off, and saying, could it be him? That they actually go and look in his car. Again, that's kind of a strong one. I mean, it's one thing to be joking, hey, you got a white Elantra, are they coming after you, bro? I mean, it wasn't like that. It was like, let's go look at his car, thinking, oh God, maybe he might be it. Like, that's a pretty swift conclusion to come to, and think you might actually be right. It's coming in with some force. Again, another one of those moments where this family seemed to have, just that dark feeling that, oh God, he may have the potential to have done this. That's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, they've been victims, especially the sister, of his lifetime of behavior. And so it gave her the ability to be, I think, more objective. She's close enough as a family member, but with an enhanced objectivity, because you've been a victim of him before in the past. It gave her the ability to do that. And, to an extent, the father as well, although you don't want to admit it, in other words, it's him. He doesn't want to admit it, most likely. Yeah. Again, conjecture in my point, but, just watching behaviors and being a father myself, you put yourself in that shoes, and you're seeing it, and you're trying to be objective. You don't want to believe what you're seeing, but the sister, being, I think, a sibling rather than a parent, gives her that objectivity. Especially, she has been the victim of him in the past. The family's been a victim of him in the past, of these abhorrent behaviors. They've seen it. They've seen that life arc of him. They've experienced it their entire lives. And so from their own point of view, especially the sisters, this wasn't a massive deviation from the arc she saw. And that's why she went to look at that car. Again, maybe not consciously thinking that, but it fit a pattern of behavior. What
sort of things do you think that they would be looking for in court if they call them as witnesses to testify? Well, let's start with the sister on that area.
I think they're going to go right on her observations. I think they're going to. I think she's again. It wasn't intuition is the ability to, our subconscious mind of seeing patterns of behavior, and when something deviates from a pattern of behavior, we take notice of it. And I think that's what they're going to really focus on with her, is what patterns of behavior, what things did you observe him doing that were not normal for him that you saw in the past, or were escalations over time. And so I think that's what they're going to really do, is because she paid attention, and so she paid so much attention to what she was seeing from him and then seeing in the media that she saw, we're going to take a look. And so I think that's what they're going to really zero in on, what her actual observations were.
Yeah, I mean, especially with him walking around the house with the latex gloves on. Do you think there was a level of comfort there that with Kohberger, that he felt like, I'm in a safe place, like no one's going to go after me? I mean, it seems really ignorant, but again, he seems to miss a lot of social cues in general of what people are going to pick up on, while being very well versed in some other areas. He seems to think that his family, they're none the wiser. Is that a flaw on Kohberger's part to have that assumption going on? And I guess, why would he have it?
So really, really interesting thought there you have, Tony. And that is, so he was a student of forensic science. He's a student of investigations and crime, but he not necessarily a great student of human behavior. And so he wasn't really picking up on his own behavior and what that was looking like to someone else. In other words, because he lacked empathy, because if he's truly psychopathic in any way, again, not a licensed clinician, but lacking massive empathy, that means he has a lack of ability to see what he's perceived like and his behaviors from the world around him. And so with that lack of empathy, a lack of ability to see what he looks like with his behaviors, he's going to have lack of ability or thoughtfulness to see what his behavior at home looks like. And also because he's probably got his own life reps of behaving a little odd at home, having the shields down of who he is down and just being present in who he is and comfortable with it. He thought nothing of just being himself at home. And since this is a new thing he needs to do, I don't even think he thought about it. He just acted without actually understanding what the impact would look like to someone else.
Just like, I have to do this. It doesn't matter. They're not going to care. They're not going to notice, and just right over his head.
You gave that more thought than I think he did.
Yeah, probably did. Probably did.
I think he was just literally, he says, I have to do this. I'm going to do this. And he's just, I studied it. I got to make sure I don't have my fingerprints on anything. Committed this crime. I got to, for a period of time, Manta, I think he's working in blocks of time that he thought were going to be appropriate. That's why he didn't turn his cell phone off from the time he thought of committing a murder, like a year maybe prior to actually committing it. If he was doing it if he was actually really, really thinking deeply, again, let's assume it's him, and he's not convicted yet, obviously. But if he, from the single point that he said, I need to do this to feel some rush, this is what my plan is, from that point on is when he should actually start turning his cell phone off when he goes out for a drive, rather than in a time block like the night of it, because now it's too obvious. He has to, in order to hide in plain sight, you actually have to create plain sight normal behavior over a large period of time. That was what is now, granted, I feel like I'm giving instructions on every serial killer out there, but you got to establish periods of time. I only do this because literally, when we're recruiting a spy, how does a spy hide in plain sight? They didn't go from zero to spying for us. They went over a period of time. They established a pattern of behavior over years and decades of being able to have covert conversations with us that would look like they're not to everyone else. I know I'm kind of being a little coy there, but in these cases, I think if he was actually doing a good job, he would have been thinking longer term of establishing patterns of behavior. I mean, think of, we were just talking about the Huerman case. Huerman established a pattern of behavior slowly escalating over a huge period of time, all these other serial killers, but he's brand new, fresh, and he was thinking so compartmentalized right in here. That was thankfully for us and the investigators a flaw.
What do you think that drive was like all the way across the country with his dad? Obviously, they got pulled over twice. We saw some very concerned-looking Kohberger at that moment in time. Dad was pretty much just chill, but we saw Brian. He was a little bit alarmed in those body cam videos. But what do you think that was like when the cops weren't there, when there wasn't that scary moment of, oh, my God, am I about to get caught? But just the two of them, sitting there chatting, father, son. Do you think it was a normal drive that they would have had before these crimes were allegedly committed by him? Or do you think there might have been something off in that drive that they'll be able to pull out of him in cross-examination?
That's a great question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know. We don't have a lot of data points on before and after with Kohberger. But just on the few interactions we had from the dad and law enforcement, his dad's behavior looked pretty normal. And remember, so he's used to his son's behavior being a little off throughout his entire life. He's used to his son's having a dark. So remember, all right. So what we do know is his son has had, Kohberger's had dark times in his life before. So his dad's used to Kohberger having darkness, having stress, having problems. And so that's a normal that his dad's been used to. Also, remember, Brian was actually going through some really tough times at the university where he's about to be kicked out of the PhD program. He had complaints filed against him. And so if Brian had an off behavior, that would actually account for that off behavior to the dad. So for the dad was helping maybe him talk about these problems he's having at the university, not realizing that that added stress he had or the problem solving behaviors that he knew he had to get into as a dad was actually triggered by murder and not being triggered by him having problems at the university. In other words, I think Brian was able to potentially hide that behavior in plain sight because he actually was having problems at the university already. So the dad just thought this was another problem with Brian. But in other words, the behaviors Brian's exhibiting was because of a murder or committing a murder. And the dad thought that same behavior might have been triggered by dealing with problems at the university. It's
like it's masking the fear with something else. Like, oh, well, it's just this. It's like my daughter made an interesting observation the other day when we were on a flight. She said, Dad, why are there so many horror movies that they give you to watch on your flights? If you like take the free entertainment thing, there's a lot of horror in there on any flights. And I'm like, that is interesting. And I kind of came to the conclusion of, well, you're basically diverting your fear. If you have a fear of flying, but maybe you like horror movies, you can push that fear over there where it's harmless. It's a movie. Nothing can happen of it, but you can still feel that fear, but know that there's something over here that it's not real at the end of the day. And then you're not focusing on your fear over here where, you know, not good odds, but there is a potential for something scary to happen. But when you divert it over there, it makes everything okay because you can just tell yourself it's just a movie, and then you land and you're not worried about the plane crashing. Same sort of thing.
Or it could be worse. It could be that.
Yeah, exactly. It could be that, but it's not. It's the movie. It's just diverting. Right. It's taking that emotion, that fear, that scariness of could my son have done this, and just rationalizing it away to, it's this over here because this makes rational sense because it's such a weird diversion from reality to think that your son would have killed 4 students. But at the same point, that's an interesting thing in this whole case. We see so many cases where people do absolutely horrific things, and you still have the family standing behind them, not necessarily believing in their innocence, but standing behind them in a compassionate way, in a humanistic way of okay, there's something wrong here, but I'm going to stand behind that person because that's all they have right now. This case seems a little different. It feels, this is just my conjecture. I can't imagine the family's like, you know, chomping at the bit to get up there on the stand and testify against Brian, but if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, they certainly don't seem like they're all that opposed of being out there and doing what's right in a case like this and putting their familial emotions aside, those memories of Christmas morning when they were kids or whatever. You got to think there's some positive memories in this family. Or is there not? I mean, maybe Brian has just been a real thorn in everyone's side their whole life, and no one can quite figure out what the hell is up with him. And they knew at some point it was going to come crashing down, and this happens to be the way it did.
I think this entire thing is devastating for the family.
Yeah.
You know, and from what I've read, the dad, Kohberger's dad reaches out to the victims' families.
Yeah.
And gives his compassion there. I mean, and there were moments as a parent that there was greatness that they saw and relief and excitement. When Brian graduated college and when he got accepted to a PhD program, when he overcame his drug addiction, when he got healthy, when he started losing weight. I mean, there's lots of moments as a dad that you've experienced with your own daughter, that we have these moments that you hold on to regardless of anything. So, but at the same time, the family, especially the dad, has exhibited the ability to be objective because he turned him into police when he was doing a drug addiction, with drugs, and so I think they're law-abiding, but at the same time, they're compassionate. I think they're just parents that struggled with a really, really problem child doing the best they could with what they had is, again, my impression from it. I think they're going to be truthful.
Yeah.
With everything. I don't think they're going to try to paint anything. I think they're going to answer the questions as they're asked is the best way I can put it.
Do you think the prosecutors are going to need to take some steps ahead of time to really kind of help them learn how to separate the emotional memories that they have of their son from the factual testimony that they're going to give? If you were, trying to advise them like, hey, we appreciate you doing this. This is not easy. My God, I can't imagine the place you're in. How do you talk to that family to help them go through something like that?
I would do just like you said. I would, because of the way they've presented themselves already, I would just validate the fact that I see the pain you're in. I see how horrible this is. And, let me know your tempo, your pace of what you need to be able to do this. But I'm with you. I'm compassionate for what you're going through, and just do it like that. Because I think his parents and the sister, I think the family members are probably going to be one of the most damning things against Brian. And it's probably going to kill the parents of that, because I think they are going to be able to lay out these behavior patterns that are going to be very damning. And it's going to crush them to be able to do that. I mean, think about that. I mean, your testimony is probably what's going to potentially kill your son.
Yeah.
At the same time, they're struggling with the fact that his son took the life of 4 others. I mean, it's just such a, this is horrendously devastating for them. And I think the prosecution, from, again, the human beings we're seeing good human beings trying to do good things for others and right wrongs, or at least bring justice to the wrongs. And it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a big challenge.
One more complete conjecture question. It's a piece of evidence that we know exists. We don't know what's in it as of yet. It's the note to Dad that was found in his apartment. And that's all we know it was called, Note to Dad. Could be nothing. I mean, it could literally be like a note that he wanted to give his dad when he was going to pick him up and remind him to, pick up more milk or something. Who knows? Or, if we're looking a little bit darker here, it was left in the apartment. It wasn't something that he brought along with him when his dad picked him up. It was there. Almost, if it is what we think it is, a note that he could get to his dad. Investigators would find it eventually if he were to be caught down the road. I mean, that shows, if it is that Kohberger was thinking he might get caught, and maybe there's some words that he wanted to say to his dad. If it's that, what do you think is in that note?
I think the note just says how much he loves his dad and appreciates him.
Yeah.
I think it's really simple. I don't think Kohberger is going to leave anything that incriminated himself. But I think he wanted something to let his dad know that he sees what his dad has done for him his entire life. Yeah.
It shows a little bit of humanity in a character that otherwise doesn't seem to have a whole lot of it. It's interesting how they can kind of weave in and out at times.
He struggled with it. We saw from his earlier writings and blog postings that we think were his. I mean, he wanted to do right. He wanted to be a better person. He kept taking steps to do that. And his evil side just got a hold of him. I literally think that's what it was. He struggled with it, and I think everyone around him struggled with it. And unfortunately, 4 beautiful young lives were destroyed, as well as the families, because he couldn't overcome and made some really, really horrendous choices with the evil inside of him.
Want true crime coverage all day, every day? Press subscribe now to the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today, and get the latest cases delivered right to your feed.